Bank parachuted into southern France just weeks before D-Day. During his insertion, Bank's team landed off target, a nightmare scenario. They were in unfamiliar terrain, surrounded by enemy patrols, carrying radios and weapons that could get them executed on the spot if captured. What's up, everybody? Welcome back to History on Repeat. When people think of U.S. Special Forces, they picture Green Berets dropping into hostile territory, linking up with guerrilla fighters, and absolutely wrecking everybody on the battlefield. Until Venezuela. Now we all just picture a bunch of badasses listening to Chief Keef gearing up to kidnap a dictator from their own country. God damn it, I still cannot get over how gangster that was. Anyways, here's one thing. That entire concept I mentioned previously to Maduro came from one man. Just like Roy Baum, the godfather of the Navy SEALs, the Army has its own version. His name was Aaron Bank, and if you've never heard of him, that's kind of the point. This is the story of the father of the U.S. Special Forces and how his unconventional life created America's most unconventional warriors.
It's History on Repeat.
Hell yeah.
Long before he ever jumped into occupied Europe, Aaron Bank was already learning how to survive in unstable environments. He just didn't know it yet. Bank was born in 1902 in New York City to Russian Jewish immigrants who had to escape the chaos of the Russian Empire. His family carried firsthand memories of pogroms, political violence, and governments turning on their own people. That mattered, because unlike most Americans of his generation, Bank grew up understanding something early. The world can turn hostile fast. And when it does, you can't always rely on institutions to save you.
What the hell? Was that because of us? I don't know. I mean, it started off super positive, then it just got crazy.
I did not like that at all.
That idea would stick with him for life. One of the most underrated parts of Bank's early life was language. Growing up in immigrant communities, Bank was exposed to multiple languages and cultures from a young age. He later formally studied languages, eventually becoming fluent in French and German, with working knowledge of others. This wasn't just academic. Years later, when he parachuted into France during World War II, Bank didn't sound like an outsider reading from a phrase book. He sounded local enough to survive. That ability to blend in, build trust, and operate across cultures would later become a core Green Beret requirement. But for Bank, it started naturally, almost accidentally. Decades earlier, Bank attended the City College of New York and later studied at Columbia University, but he never fit into the mold of a career academic or corporate professional. He was restless, curious, drawn to the edges of systems rather than the center. He studied philosophy, literature, and international politics, not because he wanted prestige, but because he wanted to understand how societies break down and how people behave when pressure is applied. That curiosity eventually pulled him overseas, and no, I don't mean World War II quite yet, but we'll get there. I promise. However, Aaron Bank spent time as a merchant seaman, traveling internationally at a time when Europe was already sliding towards catastrophe. This wasn't tourism. He witnessed rising fascism firsthand. He saw political tension building in ports and across cities in Europe, long before most Americans believed war was inevitable. Years later, Bank would say that those experiences convinced him that another global war wasn't just possible, it was unavoidable. More importantly, he learned how to navigate foreign environments, read people quickly, operate independently, and stay calm in unfamiliar territory. All skills that would later define unconventional warfare. And here's one perfect example of Bank's intuition people don't talk about enough. Before the U.S. officially entered World War II, Bank was already looking for ways to fight. He attempted to volunteer for service earlier than many of his peers, earning himself a slot as an army officer, not because of patriotism alone, but because he saw fascism as an existential threat that had to be confronted early. That mindset, act before crisis fully explodes, became central to how he believed soldiers should operate. Why wait for tanks to roll up when you can disrupt the problem early? Now, let's get into the badassery that made you click on this video. By the time the United States entered World War II, Aaron Bank was already thinking differently than most officers. While the Army focused on mass mobilization and conventional battles, Bank was drawn to a quieter kind of warfare, the kind that happened behind enemy lines with without uniforms, and without guarantees. That's what led him to the Office of Strategic Services, the OSS, known today as the CIA. And once he got there, everything clicked. OSS training wasn't about marching or saluting. It was about survival. Bank later described it as deliberately chaotic. Trainees were pushed to exhaustion, dropped into unfamiliar environments, and forced to solve problems with minimal guidance. One of the core lessons was simple. If you can't think for yourself, you won't survive. They leaned into demolition, sabotage, clandestine communications, and how to organize resistance movements without exposing them. Bank excelled, not because he was reckless, but because he stayed calm when things stopped making sense. That calm would save his life more than once. In 1944, Bank was selected for Operation Jed, one of the most dangerous missions of the war. Jed teams were tiny, usually 3 men, 1 American or British officer, 1 foreign officer, often French, and 1 radio operator. Their mission? Jump into Nazi-occupied Europe, link up with resistance forces, and help turn them into a coordinated fighting force. No extraction plan, no front lines, just trust and improvisation. Bank parachuted into southern France just weeks before D-Day. During his insertion, Bank's team landed off target, a nightmare scenario. They were in unfamiliar terrain, surrounded by enemy patrols, carrying radios and weapons that could get them executed on the spot if captured. Instead of panicking, Bank did what would later become a classic Special Forces behavior. He hid the equipment, blended in with the local population, and waited. Only after confirming local resistance contacts were genuine and not German counterintelligence did he make his move. That emphasis on verification before action would later become doctrine. Once linked up with the Marquis, Bank didn't try to take over. That was deliberate. He understood something many outsiders didn't. Resistance fighters weren't soldiers, they were locals risking their families' lives. Bank focused on training, coordination, and support, not control. He helped organize sabotage operations against rail lines, bridges, and German supply routes. One successful rail sabotage delayed German reinforcements heading toward Normandy. Small actions with a massive strategic impact. This reinforced Bank's belief that indigenous forces, properly supported, could change the course of war. But it wasn't always a smooth operation. At one point, German counterintelligence units were actively hunting OSS teams in the region. Bank noticed subtle changes. Villagers acting nervous, unexpected questions, unfamiliar faces lingering. Rather than push forward, he suspended operations and relocated the network temporarily. That decision likely saved dozens of resistance fighters from capture and possibly execution. Years later, Bank emphasized that knowing when not to act was just as important when knowing when to strike. That idea would become core to Special Forces mission planning. You screwed me up, dude. Come here. Everybody say hi to Carter. This is the newest family member of ours. But you're gonna have to go downstairs and hang out with Mom because you can't be up here with Dad. Daddy is recording. Yeah, you have to go downstairs. I know Dad's your favorite, but you have to go downstairs. Okay, sorry guys, gotta cut. Aaron Bank didn't fight World War II from the front lines. He fought it well behind them. He fought it in barns, forests, safe houses, and whispered conversations. And when the war ended, he knew something the rest of the army hadn't caught up to yet. The future of warfare was already here. It just didn't wear uniforms. After the war ended, most of the US military wanted to go back to conventional thinking. Tanks, divisions, big wars without clear front lines. Aaron Bank saw something different coming. He believed the next conflicts wouldn't look like World War II at all. They'd be messy, political, ideological, fought through proxies, insurgencies, and underground movements. So he pushed a radical idea. What if the US had soldiers whose entire job was to work with resistance forces, train guerrillas, and operate independently deep in enemy territory? Not commandos, not spies, but something new. The army wasn't exactly sold at first, but Bank didn't give up. Aaron Bank wasn't convinced that a conventional army was the end-all answer. From his perspective, World War II hadn't proven that guerrilla warfare was obsolete. It had proven the exact opposite. Small teams, working quietly with local resistance, had delayed entire enemy formation, sabotaged supply lines, and destabilized occupied regions far more effectively than anyone had expected. He imagined soldiers trained to live among local populations, train resistance fighters, and operate independently for long periods without direct oversight. At first, the idea didn't land well. Senior officers worried about control, about discipline, and about the political fallout of soldiers acting on their own initiative deep inside foreign countries. Some dismissed the concept outright as glorified guerrilla warfare. Bank didn't argue ideology, he argued results. He pointed to World War II missions where resistance forces, properly trained and coordinated, tied down thousands of enemy troops and disrupted entire campaigns. He emphasized that these weren't rogue operations. They were carefully planned, strategically decisive actions. Still, progress was slow. What finally changed everything wasn't persuasion, it was geopolitics. As tensions with the Soviet Union escalated, the army began to realize that a massive conventional war in Europe wasn't the only threat. If the Iron Curtain moved west, resistance movements would be the first and possibly only line of defense. In 1952, the Army finally gave Bank his opportunity. He was authorized to form the 10th Special Forces Group, the first official U.S. Army Special Forces unit, and from day one, Bank built it differently. He didn't recruit soldiers who looked good on parade grounds. He recruited men who could think independently, adapt quickly, and operate without constant supervision. Many were immigrants. Some spoke multiple languages fluently. Others were older veterans with unconventional wartime experience. And a few had fought in foreign armies or resistance movements during World War II. To traditional commanders, this looked like a liability. To Bank, it was the foundation. One of his earliest and most controversial decisions was prioritizing language and cultural training over weapons proficiency. Bank believed you could teach a man to shoot in weeks, but you couldn't teach trust, cultural awareness, or judgment under pressure nearly as fast. If a soldier couldn't communicate with the local fighters, he was useless, no matter how good he was with a rifle. This philosophy shaped everything. Special forces weren't meant to replace local fighters. They were meant to empower them. Green Berets would advise, train, and organize, not command from above. That idea became the core of unconventional warfare doctrine. The goal wasn't occupation. It wasn't conquest. It was helping oppressed populations fight for themselves. Even the iconic Green Beret followed that same unconventional path. It wasn't officially authorized at first. Bank and his men adopted it quietly, inspired by European resistance fighters and British commandos. Higher headquarters hated it, but the unit kept wearing it anyway. Eventually, the results spoke louder than regulations. The beret became official years later, but by then it already meant something. It represented independence, quiet professionalism, and a willing to operate outside the comfort zone. Exactly what Bank had envisioned. Behind the scenes, Bank was also preparing for the worst-case scenarios in Europe. If the Soviets invaded, special forces wouldn't retreat. They'd stay behind. They'd disappear into the population, organize resistance networks, sabotage infrastructure, and continue fighting from the shadows. This wasn't theory, it was planned, trained, and rehearsed. Long after he retired, long after the Cold War shifted and new enemies emerged, the exact way he designed special forces kept showing up on battlefields he never lived to see, and it wasn't accidental. In Vietnam, Green Berets found themselves fighting a war that didn't look anything like World War II. There were no clear front lines, no neat objectives, and no obvious path to victory. Instead, there were villages, jungle camps, and populations caught between competing forces. So special forces did what Aaron Bank had built them to do. They embedded with the indigenous fighters, trained local forces from the ground up, and lived among them for months at a time. Many of these teams operated in remote border regions where conventional units rarely went. When camps came under attack, Green Berets didn't just fight for themselves. They coordinated air support, organized local defenses, and kept resistance forces alive amongst overwhelming odds. These weren't large units winning battles through firepower. They were small teams changing the battlefield by empowering people who already lived there. That was Banks' model, playing out exactly as intended. Decades later, in the opening weeks of the war in Afghanistan, the same blueprint resurfaced almost unchanged. Small special forces teams inserted into remote mountain regions, linked up with local resistance fighters, and began coordinating operations against the Taliban. They didn't arrive with the goal of occupying territory. They arrived to enable. Those teams helped local fighters maneuver, guided airstrikes with devastating precision, and provided structure and confidence to forces that had been resisting for years without meaningful support. Entire enemy formations collapsed, not because Americans flooded the battlefield, but because local fighters suddenly had a decisive advantage. To the public, it looked new. To anyone familiar with Aaron Banks' work, it was familiar. That was unconventional warfare in its purest form. In later conflicts, the pattern repeated again and again. When conventional forces rotated out or pulled back, special forces were often sent back in, not to fight large battles, but to rebuild relationships, restore trust, and reestablish local partners that had been broken down. These teams operated quietly, sometimes with minimal visibility, living among the communities and helping local forces stabilize areas that couldn't be held through force alone. This ability to stay behind, adapt, and keep fighting without a spotlight was something Banks had planned for decades earlier during the Cold War contingency planning. He always believed the most dangerous moment in a conflict wasn't the invasion, it was what came after. Modern special forces missions don't always end up with explosions or headlines. Sometimes success looks like a village choosing not to shelter extremists. Sometimes it's a local force holding ground on its own for the first time. Sometimes it's a war that never fully ignites. These moments don't trend, but they matter, and they reflect something Aaron Banks understood early on. The best unconventional victories are the ones no one notices. From resistance fighters in occupied Europe, to jungle camps in Southeast Asia, to mountain villages halfway around the world, the fundamentals never changed. Small teams, cultural fluency, local partnerships, and independent judgment. Aaron Banks didn't just create a unit. He created a way of fighting that still works because it's built around people, not just power. Aaron Banks passed away in 2004 at the age of 101. By then, the Green Berets had become legendary. Vietnam, the Cold War, the global war on terror, but Banks always resisted being mythologized. He didn't see himself as a hero. He saw himself as a problem solver, a guy who understood that sometimes the best way to fight a war is to empower the people already living in it. Today, every Green Beret wearing that iconic headgear carries Aaron Banks' legacy, whether they know it or not. So the next time you hear about special forces operating quietly in some far-off corner of the world, remember, it all started with one man who believed wars aren't won just by firepower, but by people, trust, and ideas. That's Aaron Banks, the father of the U.S. Special Forces. I would have loved to see his reaction to us capturing Madero. God damn, that would have been funny. Anyways, if you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to like and subscribe for more military-related content, because that's what I like to do here a good majority of the time. As always, please comment if I may have missed anything, or if you would like to recommend another incredible individual for me to take a look at. Till next time, stay curious, stay sharp, and I'll see you in the next one.
It's history on repeat.
Hell yeah.